So we have a question from Justin Parker, and he asks, besides Worcester versus Georgia, were there other examples of white Americans during the 19th century stepping up and wanting to recognize the legality of Cherokee or other nations' lands? So I guess this is a question about, how much support did American Indian nations have among among white elites during the 19th century?
Well, I think we can see, I mean, there are any number of examples when it comes to individuals. I think I'm getting closer to Texas in our area out there. I think the whole story of Colorado is utterly fascinating. If you look at, we tend to think about Bent's Fort and the arrival of all these William Bent and establishing these trading empires there. And I think this is one of the coolest examples, just because, what I try to tell my students is it's not that this was all simply about seeing race or letting race define everything. It had far more to do with your economic vision of what the future held. And there were all sorts of white people who absolutely could see an economic and political future in which the two people lived together. And so in Colorado, there's this phenomenal moment in 1859. 95% of all white men involved in any sort of trade in the city had native wives. They had married into the most powerful native nations, primarily the Cheyenne and the Arapaho, so that they could get a foot in the door of these incredibly prosperous trading networks that defined the West. And so in 1859, right, this is extraordinary. You've got an entire community that is intermarried and are living quite peacefully together. But then we have to think, in 4 years, all of a sudden, then you will have the Sand Creek Massacre, and basically the United States will blow that vision to smithereens. So I do think we do find pockets and areas, and I think it has a lot to do with economic visions. I mean, not to go on too long, but I think, one of the most striking things I try to explain to my students is the distinctions between Spanish, French, and British colonialism, right? That the Spanish and French, if you think about it, right, they came and they wanted to missionize, they wanted to convert native people to Christians, they wanted to, become involved in native fur trading networks if they were the French, or the Spanish, of course, they wanted native people as their laborers. So they had inclusive colonial or imperial visions. They did not envision any success in the Americas without native involvement. So their vision of their colonial worlds always included native people. It is the British who are unusual in that they did not envision an inclusive system of colonialism, right? That it was about expulsion or extermination, unfortunately. And so we can see completely different tracks there. And so I think that's one of the reasons that 18th century Texas looks completely different than other areas of the colonial world. So.
Excellent. And then I have one, and I'm going to teach this stuff, and I'm thinking maybe a lot of teachers heard you say this stat early in your talk. Was it 1,600 different examples of essentially land grab situations? Can you just go back and say repeat that?
Oh yeah, no. Well, what I mean is that there were 1,642 occasions in which the United States negotiated peace treaties that involved land cessions with different native nations. Or one of the other examples I always give is the Louisiana Purchase that, we have touted forever. Oh, the Louisiana Purchase, man, it was the greatest bargain in the world, right? Oh, we got it early, $15 million. Like, no, because of course, right? France didn't have the power to sell the land because they didn't control the land. They didn't occupy the land, right? The only thing the United States bought with the Louisiana Purchase was the right to negotiate 222 times with all the native nations who lived in the area that was defined as this supposed purchase. And up until well, I'm trying to think, 2015, if you do an accounting, the Louisiana Purchase instead has actually cost the United States $9.5 billion, which does not include the $1.5 billion sitting in a trust account for the Lakota Sioux, because of course the Lakota refused to take payment. What they want, and again, I think it's very important to look at this map again, is like, we don't want your money, we want our land back. And they're not taking it.
Yeah,
So,
that's amazing. There's a real quick follow-up from Ernest, and I think this is the point of this map, but he asked how many of those treaties are actually honored.
oh, well, none of them were
Yeah.
honored, but what the Indian Claims Commission was set up to do initially, right? And this was not a progressive moment in U.S. governing policy in the 1970s. The whole notion was that we are going to settle every dispute. We don't want to ever deal with this again. And so we are going to, make amends for every single treaty violation. And then, of course, they found, well, one, Native nations were not willing to just, like the Lakota, take payouts on it. And but these treaties, as we see, and you can see it again and again, most recently, right? They still have standing in law. They can still go into court and demand that the United States meet the terms of these treaties, which were negotiated in good faith. I mean, the other thing is, of course, even with McGirt, the Supreme Court could overturn it next year. So there's not necessarily much reason to have faith that the United States will honor treaties, given the history. but Native nations have had increasing amounts of success in court.
Yeah, yeah. Terrific. Well, that's great. Well, why don't you transition us into the